Hi there, year 5 and 6, Mr. A here with Story Time, and today we're going to finish off chapter 4 of Susan Cooper's Oversea Under Stone. If you remember from yesterday, Jane has just figured something out of the manuscript, the map, and she's off to see the local vicar to talk about his guidebook and see whether the coastlines changed shape, which might explain the differences between her map and the one in the book. Anyway. "'Tis a beautiful place. Long way though up the hill to the top of the village. You can just see the tower through the trees going up Fish Street from the quay." "Oh, I think I know." "Don't get sunstroke now." Mrs. Polk sailed benevolently out with the dishes, and in a moment Jane heard "Abide with me" echoing with the rich gloomy relish down the hall from the kitchen. She ran upstairs, looked hastily round for a place where she might hide the manuscript case, and finally tucked it among the covers at the foot of her bed, so that it could lie along the edge of the mattress and leave no bump. Then, before her nervousness could get the better of her new idea, she went out, clutching her guidebook, into the sleepy afternoon sun. The church at the top of the hill seemed cut off from the sea. Jane could see nothing from there but trees and the hills, and even the little village houses ended some 20 yards down the road. The square grey church with its low tower and the big gate posts opposite it might have been in any wooded valley 100 miles from the sea. In the churchyard, a wizened old man in shirt sleeves and braces was cutting the grass with a pair of shears. Jane stopped near him on the other side of the wall. "Excuse me," she said loudly, "but is that the vicarage over there?" The old man, wheezing, straightened himself by holding one arm round to push himself in the small of the back. "That's right," he said laconically, and then just stood there, staring without expression, watching her all the way across the road and up the drive. Jane heard her feet crunching on the gravel, enormously loud in the silent afternoon. The big square grey house, its windows empty and lifeless, seemed to dare her to disturb it. It was a very scruffy house, she thought, for a vicarage. The gravel of the drive was clotted with weeds, and in the rambling garden hydrangea bushes grew spindly and neglected, with the grass of the lawns as high as hay. She pressed the bell push by the side of the peeling door and heard a bell ring faintly inside the house, echoing a long way off. After a long time, when she had just begun to decide with relief that no one was there to answer the bell, she heard footsteps inside the house. The door opened, creaking resentfully as if it did not often open at all. The man standing there was tall and dark, untidy in an old sports jacket, but at the same time forbidding, with the thickest black eyebrows that Jane had ever seen growing almost straight across his brow without a break in the middle. He stared down at her. "Yes?" His voice was very deep, without a trace of accent. "Is Mr. Hawes Mellor in, please?" The tall man frowned. "Mr. who?" "Mr. Hawes Mellor, the vicar." His face cleared a little, though still the intent black-browed stare did not relax. "Ah, I see. Mr. Hawes Mellor, I'm afraid, is no longer vicar here. He died a number of years ago." "Oh," said Jane, and stepped back off the doorstep, not at all sorry at the chance to go away. Well, in that case, perhaps I can be in some help," he said in the deep, mournful voice. "My name is Hastings. I've replaced Mr. Hawes Mellor here." "Oh," Jane said again. She was beginning to find the lone Mr. Hastings and his strange, neglected house and garden rather unnerving. "Oh no, I don't want to be a nuisance. It was only something about a book he wrote, a guidebook to the village." A flicker of interest seemed to wake in the vicar's dark face. "A guidebook to Trewhissick? There was some talk he had written one, but I've never been able to trace a copy. What was it you wanted to ask? I'm afraid that if you're looking for the book, I can be of no help." "Oh no," Jane said, not without pride. "I've got one." She held her little guidebook up to show him. "It was just something inside it about the village that I wondered if he'd got wrong." The vicar stared down at the book, opened his mouth to say something, and then seemed to change his mind. He held the door wider open and moved his mouth into an uneasy smile. "Well, do come in for a few moments, young lady, and we'll see what we can do. I know a little about Trewhissick myself after many years here." "Thank you very much," Jane said nervously. She stepped inside the door, hitching up the ribbon on her ponytail as she followed him down the passage, and hoping she looked reasonably tidy. Not that she would have been out of place if she had been in rags, she thought, looking around her. The vicarage was one of the most unloved-looking and shabbiest houses she had ever seen. It was big and rambling, with more sense of space than the grey house, but the paint was peeling, the walls grubby, and the floors were all bare with one or two faded rugs. She began to feel rather sorry for the vicar as he strode stiffly along ahead of her. He led her into a room which was obviously his study, with a big desk strewn with papers, two battered cane chairs with faded cushions, and shelves of books all round the walls. Tall French windows stood wide open to show the stretch of long grass that Jane had glimpsed from the front drive. "Now," he said, sitting down behind his desk and clearing a space impatiently in the litter of papers on its top. "Sit yourself down and tell me what you were going to ask Mr. Hawes Mellor. You've found a copy of his book, have you?" He stared again at the book in Jane's hand. It seemed to fascinate him. "Yes," Jane said. "Would you like to have a look at it?" She held the book out to him. The vicar took it, slowly closing his fingers round the narrow cover as if it was something infinitely precious. He did not open it, but put it down on the desk before him, and looked at it so hard he seemed not to be seeing it, but thinking about something else. Then he turned his grave, heavy-browed face towards Jane again. "You are on holiday here?" "Yes, my name's Jane Drew. I'm staying with my family in the Grey House." "Are you indeed? That is not a house I am very familiar with." Mr. Hastings smiled rather grimly. "Captain Toms has no time for me, I am afraid. A strange, solitary man." "We've never met him," Jane said. "He's gone abroad." "And this book of yours?" His fingers caressed its cover almost unconsciously. "Is it interesting?" "Oh, tremendously. I love all the stories about Trewissick and where the smugglers and things." For a moment Jane wondered doubtfully whether to mention the map after all, but her curiosity overcame any doubts. She stood up and crossed to stand beside him, leafing through the book to the page with the map of South Cornwall. "This was the bit that puzzled me, the shape of the coastline. I wanted to ask if it had ever been different once." Standing behind the vicar, she could not see his face, but his shoulders seemed to stiffen as he looked at the map, and the fingers of his hand lying on the desk curled gently underneath into the palm. "A curious question?" he asked. I just wondered. I see there is another line pencilled over the coastline of the map here. Is that yours?" "Yes." "From your imagination?" The deep voice was quieter. "More or less. Well, that is, I saw something like it somewhere, in a book or something." Jane floundered, trying to avoid mentioning their manuscript from the attic without actually telling untruths. "If you know about Trewissick, Mr. Hastings, do you know if the coast has always been the same shape?" "I should have thought so. A granite coast takes a very long time to change." He was staring at the pencilled line. "You say you saw this outline in a book?" "Oh, a book or another map or something," Jane said vaguely. "In the Grey House?" "We don't touch the captain's books," Jane said automatically, forgetting that the guidebook must be one of them. "But you have looked around them, no doubt." The vicar rose to his feet, towering above her, and reached out a long arm to take a book from one of the shelves. He handed it to Jane. It was very old and covered with shiny scuffed leather, and the pages crackled and gave off a smell of musty age when she opened it. It was called Tales of Lioness, and a lot of the S's were printed like F's. "Have you seen any book there like that?" His voice was persistent. He stood between Jane and the light, and looking up at him she could see nothing but a faint glint of light reflected from his eyes in the shadowed face. The effect was for a moment exceedingly sinister, and Jane felt creeping over her the small cold uneasiness that was becoming familiar about this holiday, a sense of something mysterious that everyone else knew about that was hidden from her brothers and her. "No, I don't think so." "Are you sure? A title like that, perhaps. You might have seen a map in such a book." "No, really, we just haven't looked." "Might you not have seen a volume on a shelf, similar to this one?" I honestly don't know," Jane said, shrinking back in her chair at the urgency that had come into her voice. "But why don't you ask the captain?" Mr. Hastings took the book back from her and tucked it back into its place on the shelf. The grave, near frown was back on his face. "He is not a communicative man," he said shortly. Uneasiness was nudging more insistently at Jane's mind, and she began to fidget from one foot to another. Well, I must be off home, she said, using one of Mother's phrases brightly and hoping it sounded polite. I'm sorry to have interrupted you. She glanced rather wildly from the window to the door. The vicar, standing silent and intent, pulled himself together and moved towards the French windows. You can come out this way, it's quicker. The front door is seldom used. He held out his hand to Jane. I am pleased to have met you, Miss Drew. I am sorry not to have been more helpful, but I must say I think it unlikely that our coast here has ever had any characteristics that are not shown on Mr. Hawes-Mellor's map. He was, I understand, a cartographer of some repute. I am glad you came to see me. He inclined his head gravely as he shook Jane's hand, with a strange, archaic gesture that reminded her suddenly of Mr. Withers when he had left the grey house. But this, she thought, seemed more genuine, as if it was something which Mr. Withers had been trying to imitate. Goodbye, she said quickly, and ran off through the long feathery grass towards the drive of the silent shabby house and the road that led back home. Alright, that's the end of chapter 4. Thanks very much for watching. I'll be back again tomorrow with the start of chapter 5. Lots of creepy people in this Trewhisk place, isn't there? Right, let's see what happens next then. Alright, take care everybody, have a great day. Bye bye.